For the last 5 years, I've grown 90% of our fruit and vegetables whilst working full time and without burning out. And the key to my success has been getting my garden design right. A well-planned garden design that works with nature sets you up for more food with less effort. And without it, even the most passionate gardener can face wasted effort, rising costs, and disappointing harvests. So whether you're starting from scratch or improving an existing garden, this is your step-by-step guide to designing what I call a functional food garden. One that's easy to manage and actually feeds you. In this video, I'll share simple, proven frameworks that you can apply to any site, distilled from my 10 years of design experience in architecture and permaculture. This could be a suburban block, a homestead, or a community garden. Using this 100 square meter backyard as an example, you'll learn how to analyze your site, plan efficient layouts, select the right plants, and avoid common and costly design mistakes. And because garden design often feels overwhelming and unclear, I've also created a free 30-page workbook to guide you with more detail. You'll find the link in the description below. All right, let's get into it. So I found this property on realestate.com.au, located in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. It's a 550 square meter block with a single-story brick house, which is a little smaller than the median residential property size in Melbourne. The backyard is about 100 square meters, and with the right design techniques, I think you could comfortably grow several hundred kilograms of food in this backyard every year. Let's imagine that the owners of this property are a young family whose goal is to improve their health, connect to nature, and make savings on their grocery bill. They want to grow a lot of food, so they're willing to dedicate their whole backyard so long as it looks beautiful. But the parents work full time, so they don't want it to take up too much time. So this brings me to the first step in the functional food garden journey, which is to set your goals. It's a great idea to understand what you want to achieve in your garden before you start, because your unique goals will shape every design decision you make.
Say it again.
Design. So consider things like your budget, how much time you can spend, and how much food that you'd like to grow. For example, if your garden is likely to only be a short-term project for immediate grocery savings, then it's probably not going to be worth spending a ton of money on equipment and materials. On the other hand, when I started my food garden journey, I was committed to making a longer term lifestyle change, and so I saw the money I spent as more of an investment. So take the time to set some clear goals, because it's going to make your garden journey much more focused and fulfilling. In the workbook, there's an exercise to support you with your vision and some prompting questions. Okay, so you've done your goals and you're ready to start designing. You want to sketch out your beds and paths, but hang on, not quite yet. Easy, tiger. No. We know what you want, but it's not all about you. We also need to know what your site wants. And by analysing your site, you can design to work with the landscape rather than against it. The first mistake to avoid is this: diving into your design without understanding your site first. If you skip this step, then you may end up replicating something you've seen online that's just totally inappropriate for your site. So making the effort upfront will result in a design that saves you time, energy, and resources in the long run. So how do we analyse our site? Well, the main elements that are crucial to understand are climate, plants and animals, sun path, water, access, soil, and pollution. I like to analyse these factors in 3 different ways, and that is to observe the site in person and interact with it, research climate and weather data, and visualise the impacts of these elements on the site using a scaled basemap. Now, before we walk through the analysis of our example site, it's worth noting that the workbook covers each of these elements with detailed actions, which aren't included in this video because it would take ages to get through them all. So here's our backyard again. Let's talk about what we can observe. Firstly, there's a garden shed, which could be really useful for storage. This Hills hoist is a quintessential element of the Australian backyard, but along with the concrete path, it's posing as quite a large obstruction smack bang in the middle of the garden. The back door to the house is the main point of access, and there's access from the driveway through here, which will be important for bringing in bulky materials and equipment. The building on the edge of the image here is the garage, which has about 50 square meters of roof draining into this downpipe here, and I'm thinking this could be a really good opportunity to harvest some rainwater. Now, it's difficult to do plant identification from these photos alone, but I can see that the vine growing on the shed is jasmine, and the tree in front of it is an umbrella tree. The lawn to me looks like kikuyu, and there's a mix of ornamental tree species running along the northern and western boundaries. There's a palm there, there's some yuccas, ugh, I hate yuccas, and a few cypress trees on the neighbouring property. Ornamental trees can play a role in our food garden, and they can serve as a source of shade, mulch, or as a windbreak, but I think there's an opportunity here to introduce some productive fruit or nut trees. Now, I can't visit this site because, well, that would be trespassing, but if I was to visit this site, I'd be looking for any signs of wildlife to consider in the design, as well as the characteristics of the soil and any potential sources of pollution. There are instructions as well in the workbook for a simple soil test that you can do for free. It goes without saying that the climate you live in is going to have a fundamental impact on how you design a functional food garden. It's going to determine what you can grow to a large extent and the techniques you use to create favourable conditions for your plants. So knowing your climate zone as per the Köppen classification system is a great place to start. Our example site is in a temperate oceanic climate, which is characterised by mild winters and mild summers, but because of the urban heat island effect, temperatures in Melbourne are often 5 degrees hotter than surrounding areas. And this means that the summers in Melbourne are actually quite hot, and it rarely gets below freezing in winter. So we do have frosts, but they're usually pretty infrequent and not very severe. In terms of rainfall, the northern suburbs of Melbourne receive about 650 mil annually, which is spread fairly evenly across the year. From a wind perspective, as this wind rose demonstrates, Melbourne has prevailing winds from two main directions. The southwesterly winds are cold because they come off the ocean, whereas the northerly winds usually bring warmth as they come from inland. So what does this mean for our garden design? Well, with some care, we can grow frost-sensitive perennials. Food can be grown all year round without the need for a greenhouse or a grow tunnel. But the hot summers with relatively low rainfall mean that the garden may need a substantial amount of water over the warmer months, so we'll need to plan for that. And finally, I think the garden will also benefit from some protection from those southwesterly and northerly winds. In order to map our research and observations, it really helps to have a base map. This is a to-scale, bird's-eye view of our site. Now, you could draw this up from on-site measurements that you take yourself, or you could start from an aerial image. And I go through how to do this in the workbook step by step, and it's worth spending the time to make sure this is accurate because it's going to become the canvas for your garden design. I've hand-drawn mine using property measurements taken from the property plans I found online, and I've captured the main physical elements, including the trees, structures, paths, and points of access. The first thing I want to visualize on my base map is the sun path. Sunlight is one of the most important factors in garden design, and by identifying where the sun shines and where the shade falls, we can place each element where it functions best. So let's imagine you're standing in the middle of this garden and use this as the center point for our sun path. Regardless of your location, the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, and we want to understand the path that it takes in the sky between those 2 points. This depends on where you are in the world in relation to the equator and what time of year it is. There are some really comprehensive tools online available for free that you can use to get an accurate sense of where your sun path is. And I recommend exploring these tools, but don't obsess about it. You don't need 100% accuracy. You're really just trying to get a rough sense of your sun path. And I go through how to do this based on your latitude in the workbook. Okay, back to our example. Based on Melbourne's latitude, let's map the sun's path in winter and in summer because these are the times where it'll be most different. The winter midday sun is low and to the north, so the sun will move through the sky and hit these points to form an arc. So that's our winter sun path. The midday sun in summer is more directly overhead, so the path will look something like this. Because my sun paths are both in the north, I'm going to take an average to project the shade, but if your paths are really different, then I recommend doing this for both winter and summer. Let's look at the morning shade first and use mid-morning, say 9:30 AM as an average. The direction of the sun always shines towards our center point where we are standing, and we can project this angle across the whole site to see where our shadows fall. Take this shed here as an example. In the morning, it'll block sunlight to the west and to the south. Now let's do the same thing for the afternoon sun at 3 PM. If we look at the same area of the garden, this time the neighbour's house will be casting a shadow towards the southeast. Now where the shadows overlap, these areas will be in full shade. And here's what that looks like across the whole site. It's now clear which areas of the garden will receive morning shade, afternoon shade, full shade, and full sun. We'll be referring back to this when we start designing. Water is another critical element that we need to visualize on our base map. We've already observed the downpipe and the garage on the property, and we've identified through our research that this garden will likely need a substantial amount of water over the warmer months. So to reduce the cost of our garden, we want to capture rainwater from the roof, which we'll explore in a minute when we get into design. It's worth mentioning that there are a bunch of other considerations in the workbook related to water analysis, such as slope, soil erosion, waterlogging, and flooding. These elements aren't particularly relevant for this site, so our water strategy is going to be pretty straightforward. But if you'd like me to dig into this topic on a larger property, then let me know in the comments. The last thing I'm going to put on my base map is the prevailing winds that we've previously discussed. So closing out our site analysis phase, there's a few design decisions we can make based on our observations and research. Firstly, I'm going to remove the hills hoist so that we can maximize our growing area because it's in a spot that gets a lot of sun and it's going to limit what we can do in terms of access. Let's remove the path, step and balustrade. And finally, let's remove half of the ornamental trees to make way for productive trees. The ones that we retain are going to serve as windbreaks on the western and northern boundaries to protect our vegetables. Now it's time to bring together our goals and our site analysis into a cohesive design for our functional food garden. And if you've been finding this video useful so far, let me know in the comments, give it a like, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. The design process that I'm going to walk you through is based on permaculture design methods and P.A. Yeoman's scale of permanence. This design strategy tackles the most permanent landscape characteristics first and the easiest to change last. The 5 steps of our functional food garden design process are to establish a water strategy, map zones, lay out beds and access, plot systems and structures, and finally select and arrange plants. At the core of this process is design iteration. This means that as you incorporate elements into your design at each step, you're likely to need to rearrange other elements that you've already placed. So don't feel overwhelmed or disheartened. This is a normal and important part of the process. And until you get all the elements on the page, you're not necessarily going to know how it all fits together. So while the design I'm going to show you looks very polished and finished, rest assured, I spent a lot of time behind the scenes trying to work it all out. The most important aspect of our design to resolve first is our water strategy. Harnessing the flow of water across your site may involve tanks in plumbing, dams, swales, diversion drains, or irrigation. And these features really need to work in harmony with the landscape, and they may require infrastructure or earthworks. Which brings me to the second mistake to avoid, considering your water strategy as an afterthought rather than as a central part of your design. Without a clear water strategy, you may end up with too much water or not enough water, costing you time, money, and yields. So we've already spoken about capturing rainwater off this garage roof by connecting to this downpipe. We need to hold the water in some tanks, and the logical place for them is right next to the downpipe. For this size garden, I think 3,000 litres or 800 gallons of rainwater storage will be enough, and a cost-effective way to store that much water is with IBC tanks. They each hold 1,000 litres and measure roughly 1 metre cubed, so we'll need 3. These are tanks that are used for shipping liquids internationally, so they're readily available in many parts of the world and usually pretty cheap. The one downside is they're pretty ugly. I have one of these in my garden in a prominent position which I clad with recycled timber pallets, and I reckon it looks pretty good. So let's do that in this garden. We can connect these 3 tanks with some irrigation pipe so they fill evenly, and connect the outlets to a central pump to easily distribute the water via a hose. You could also connect drip lines or sprinklers, but I'm not going to go through that in this video. Next, we're going to map our zones. Permaculture zones are a way to think about positioning aspects of design based on their level of use or required attention. So you want the things that you access the most closest to where you spend the majority of your time, your house. These 5 standard zones are more relevant for larger properties, which we can cover in another video, but for this backyard we can divide it into 2 zones. Zone 1 usually includes herbs and veg that are harvested frequently, whereas Zone 2 includes more perennials and slower growing annual crops. The third mistake is designing without really considering where you spend most of your time. This can often result in placing high maintenance plants and systems too far from your daily path, ultimately leading to neglected crops, wasted time, and lower yields. It's time to lay out our garden beds and access. Here we need to strike a balance between aesthetics and functionality whilst enabling effective movement around the garden. First, I'm locating the beds in the areas of full sun as per our site analysis, reserving the shadier areas for other functions. And next, I decide on the orientation of the beds. This backyard is pretty flat, so I'm running them north-south, and generally orienting them in this direction is better than east-west, as the beds won't overshadow each other as much. But if your site is on a slope, then prioritize running your beds across the hill, as this will allow them to hold water and prevent erosion. Given this is a rectangular site, I think it lends itself to a grid layout, but if it suits your site, you can certainly use organic shapes. I've chosen mulched paths for this garden that will be 600mm or 24 inches wide. This is the minimum width that allows for foot traffic and wheelbarrow access. I'll combine this with double reach beds that are 1200mm or 48 inches wide. Beds of this width allow you to reach the center from either side. The type of bed you choose, whether it's in-ground, raised, sunken, or terraced, is going to depend on your soil, climate, and accessibility needs. And I touch on the pros and cons of each in the workbook, but here I'm going to use slightly raised beds with 200mm high cypress sleepers. This will look great, and the beds will be easy to reach for both kids and adults. If we were to make these beds taller, then the paths would need to be widened to allow a wheelbarrow to pass through. And keeping them low also reduces the cost in materials required to frame and fill them. Alright, our paths and beds are in. Now let's plot the structures and systems that underpin our functional food garden. So we need to consider any permanent or semi-permanent structures that support our garden's goals and functions. This could be things like tool storage, composting setup, trellises, a chicken coop, fencing, or even a patio. Here I'm positioning a 3-bay compost system in a central location with good access, which will be the engine room for the garden's fertility. Given this is a shady spot, I'm also putting a propagation area for germinating seedlings and a tabletop cold frame. Next to the shed is, I think, a great spot for a table and chairs, which will receive afternoon shade and have a nice view of the garden. And finally, we already have a shed, but you can never have too much space for storage, especially a spot that's concealed behind a screen to keep the garden looking beautiful and orderly. You'll also see that I've added in some bricks and tiling, both for aesthetics and durability, because these will be highly trafficked areas. Here we are at our last step of the functional food garden design process, where we select and arrange plants. We've got all of our infrastructure laid out, we've optimized our design for the site. Now this is where the garden really comes to life. Depending on your goals and growing space, your garden ecosystem might contain a range of plants. But edible crops are not necessarily the only plants that you want to include in your food garden. You may also want to include plants for building and maintaining fertility, plants for windbreaks, for pollinators, or maybe just simply for beauty. In the workbook, there's an exercise to help you research and brainstorm perennial and annual plant species. But for this example, I'm going to use the crops I provided in my 4-hour food garden video as the base for a high yield, low effort food production. As I position each plant, I'll consider a variety of factors such as shade versus sun, permaculture zones, aesthetics, wind, and vertical structures. First, I incorporate perennials into the design. Now, perennials, particularly trees, deserve extra care in planting because they're central to building a resilient long-term system. So let's place a pear, apple, apricot, fig, and lemon tree amongst the ornamentals to bolster that windbreak whilst giving us a diverse yield of delicious fruit. I'm also placing some trees in the center of these beds to provide some summer shade. I've chosen plums because they lose their leaves much earlier than other deciduous trees in Melbourne's climate, which lets through light in autumn for cool season crops to get established. The next perennials to locate are some herbs, specifically rosemary, sage, thyme, and oregano. These will go in zone 1 in the bed next to the shed, nice and close to the house for easy picking. Then I'll place a raspberry patch in zone 2 in the northwest corner, because this will be visited infrequently and it's shaded from the hot western sun. The last perennials to place are rhubarb and strawberries under the fruit trees, as they'll tolerate the lack of direct sunlight. The remainder of the bed space can be taken up by annuals, which will obviously change from season to season and should be rotated around, but here's what a warm season crop layout could look like. Now, all the crops I locate in zone 1 are harvested frequently. This bed contains silver beet closest to the house, kale and lettuce under the shade of the plum tree, and above that is rocket flanking a couple of Cape gooseberries and a row of strawberries. The next bed includes zucchinis and capsicums at one end and eggplants and cucumbers at the other. The cucumbers will grow up a simple trellis. Next to the perennial herbs, I'll place some annual ones, namely dill, coriander and basil. I'll also stick some mint here in some pots so it doesn't get out of control. In zone 2, in the bed starting on the right, I've got a row of cherry tomatoes with a row of beets and spring onions next to them. The tomatoes will enjoy the warmth from the adjacent garage brick wall, and the beets will enjoy their shade. Next to that, I've included some more zucchini at the front, a couple of rows of turnips running the length of the bed, and some more capsicums at the back. These additional zucchini and capsicum plants will allow the family to be self-sufficient in these crops. Here we have another block of tomatoes, this time a slicing variety, with some potatoes behind. And finally, in the back corner, I'm including a small patch of butternut squash, which will only be harvested at the end of the season and enjoy protection from the hot afternoon sun. So here it is, our functional food garden in a 100 square meter suburban backyard. I'd love to know in the comments what you found useful in this video, and if there's anything you'd like me to discuss in more detail. I've put a lot into it, so I hope it helps you take action with confidence and clarity.